Hi, I'm Pamela, and this is episode 4 of the Fiber Sprite podcast. This podcast is all about knitting, spinning, weaving, and dyeing, as well as some other fiber arts that I dabble in along the way. So let's get started. So I am wearing my Camaro sweater, which is finished. This pattern is by Tanis, and it was meant to be a stash buster for me. And I definitely used up all of my yarn. So I didn't have enough yarn to make full length sleeves. So I did end up switching to 3/4 length sleeves. I was just knitting along and looking at the yarn that I had left, and sometimes you just know you're going to run out of yarn. So I recalculated the sleeves to be 3/4 length sleeves and finished it that way. I'm not 100% sure if I like them, so I'm almost tempted to take the sleeves, rip back the sleeves, and then knit some more of the striping sequence in both the sleeves and the body, because I do feel like the body's just a hair short compared to what I want and what I typically like out of a sweater. So I'm loving that I have a finished sweater, especially now that it's pretty chilly outside, but I'm also like, it's not perfect. But it was definitely a good stash buster. It has used up enough yarn that I was able to close the bucket that holds this weight of yarn. It was a, decent project to work on. So what else with knitting? So last episode I shared the yarn that I had bought at the Sneffels Fiber Festival in Ridgeway, Colorado. And so I bought some from the 2BU farm, and I've got some more around here somewhere. But I knit a swatch and unraveled parts of it to calculate what my gauge was. So I'm knitting this on a size 4 needle, and I'm going to make a sweater out of this. So that's the swatch. And then I have started a cable pattern. So this is an antler cable that I modified a little bit to make it wider and changed it up just a tiny bit. And so that will be the edging for the sweater. I'm going to knit the cable first and then do the sweater afterwards. And I calculated the yarn, the gauge that I had, and about how much I thought I would use for a sweater, and I found that I was a little bit short, but luckily I just came back from the Taos Wool Festival and they were there, so I filled in the gap of how much I needed while I was at the Taos Wool Festival. So that is knitting and spinning. So last episode I shared the South Down fiber that I had dyed. This is the fiber. There's just the 2 braids of it that are available, and I spun the other braid. And so this is what I've got. This is 3 plies, and it's going to be sock yarn. So I'm going to test it out and knit a pair of socks with this and see how well it does. It's definitely not a soft fiber, but it's springy and it's sturdy. While I was at the Taos Wool Festival, there are a couple of yarn shops in Taos, and I was in one and somebody was talking about spinning yarn for socks and how she doesn't really buy sock yarn anymore. She doesn't use superwash, she doesn't use nylon, she just uses South Down, and that works out pretty well for her. So that was pretty encouraging, and I'm hoping to get a nice pair of socks out of this. So with weaving, I have started warping my floor loom, which is a challenge because it's kind of crammed into a really tight space right now. But one of the things that I've been meaning to do for a really long time is make a rag rug out of old blue jeans. So a couple weekends ago, I sat down and I tore apart strips. These are from my husband's blue jeans, and they had been mended and mended and mended, and there were just spots that were getting really difficult to mend over and over again, and starting to look pretty bad, to the point where you wouldn't even really want to buy them at a thrift store, even if they were super cheap. So they went into the rag pile, and this has been building for a couple years. And so I went ahead and took them apart and ripped them into strips. So the next step is going to be sewing the strips together, which I'll do on my sewing machine. And I usually sew them on a bias angle and then trim that angle. And then I will iron them to fold them in to make them easier to weave. But that's step number one, and I'm working on figuring out the weaving pattern that I want to do. So I shared this, so this is about one leg of a men's pair of jeans. And I shared this over on Instagram and Facebook, and people were really interested in the process, so this is something that I'm going to be working on some more. So that's what's going on with my projects right now. So recently I went to an estate sale for someone who had passed away, and she had been a very serious textile artist. She had been a member of my local guild, although I'd never met her. She had basically stopped being active in the group and probably with her fiber arts before I moved to the area. Estate sales are sort of an interesting thing. Some people really love them and some people really hate them. But with textile artists, it's really interesting because there are books. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today, some of the books that I purchased in the estate sale. And the one that is most intriguing to me is this one. It is Weaving a Life. It's the story of Mary Meggs Atwater, who was quite a very famous weaver in the United States. And what's really cool is that little pattern on the cover is hand woven. So I thought that was really neat, and I'm excited to kind of read about her life. So that's Weaving a Life. And then this book I've read about, it's called Weaving in Miniature. It's a book that takes complex patterns and makes them smaller so you can weave them in a smaller format. So I think that's really interesting, and it'll be a nice little reference book to have on hand. And then this book is Finishing Touches for the Hand Weaver, and it's basically a lot of different ways that you can deal with hems, edgings, or even the border on a piece of fabric that you're weaving, and different fringes, different hem stitching, all sorts of things. And this one is, it's out of print. It was republished in 1988. So that's one of the things about estate sales, is that you can get some of these out of print books that are actually quite good for a really good price. So this is the last one that I got, which is the Handbook of Time-Saving Tables for Weavers, Spinners, and Dyers. And this was really interesting because it's got like a lot of explanations of the size of yarn and the number of yards per pound, and then it talks about, what else does it talk about? It talks about how to identify various fibers, whether you're doing a burn test or exposing it to bleach or something like that, how that fiber is going to react whenever you do that test, so that if you've got some unidentified fiber, you can figure out what it is. It's also got a reed substitution chart, which is really helpful in weaving. You might have a reed that is, say, 10 ends per inch, but you need to do something at 27 ends per inch, and this will get you pretty close to that. It's also got a worksheet for figuring out your warp, and it has standard sizes for a lot of textiles. So your tea towels, your pot holders, tablecloths. That's going to be useful. Because a lot of times I find myself Googling what's the standard size for a bath mat, right? And it just doesn't, there's so much out there. And so just to have a starting point would be really helpful. It's got a dyeing workbook. So there's just a lot in here. I think this is going to be really useful. So those are some of the books that I got at the estate sale. It's not all of them, but they're the ones that I am most excited for. And I also have a couple of new publications to share. So this is Clara Park's new book. It's Vanishing Fleece. And I am just about 50 pages into it, but it is really good so far. So if you're interested in how wool is processed, particularly in the United States, this is going to be a really good resource for you. And then I got the most recent Handwoven magazine. So this is the first edition since it's been taken over by Long Thread Media. So it's no longer interweave. It is handwoven. The paper is a lot nicer. It was getting really flimsy. The advertising is a lot more relevant. They were starting to do like bathtub advertisements that were really driving me crazy, and all of the advertisements are actually related to textile arts, which I really appreciate. And there are some really nice articles in here. And they have 10 projects to weave. Their theme this edition is out of the box. And one of the ones that I'm really intrigued by is this placemat set, Bauhaus Placemats. So I think that's really interesting. And it's on 8 shafts, which will force me to actually use all 8 shafts that I have on my floor loom. So stay tuned to see whether I do it or not. But if you have not gotten handwoven, in the past, or if you maybe stopped getting it because the quality was starting to decline, I have to say that they've done a really nice job with really bringing it back to life and making it something that is worthwhile. So if weaving is something that you're into and you haven't been getting handwoven for a while, it's worth taking a second look. Okay, so I mentioned that I had gone to Taos Wool Festival, and like I did with my purchases at Sniffles, I'm just going to share with you the things that I got at Taos. So this is the biggest thing, both physically and in expenditures, that I purchased at Taos. It is a wool picker, so it swings back and forth, and it's got teeth. I told my husband that it was a medieval torture instrument. So it picks open the wool when you're processing a raw fleece. This is handmade, it's used, it's about 40 years old. And it works, I hope it works really well. I'm hoping that it will help me speed up some of my fiber processing when I'm working with raw fleeces. So one of the things that I have been really adamant about this fall is not buying any new raw wool fleeces just because I'm so far behind on processing the ones that I have. So I'm hoping that this will help me speed up the process some, and it's really cool. Oh, so the wool picker I purchased from Mudita Camel Dairy, and she's focusing more on her milk that she gets from her camels. She has an Airbnb, which is kind of interesting. I might see if I can wrangle my husband into that. But so she decided she wasn't going to be hand processing her fiber anymore, and so she sold the wool picker. So that's pretty cool. So this was an impulse purchase. It is a locker hooking kit, and locker hooking is similar to rug hooking. This is what the kit makes, so I've already completed it. It is definitely beginner work. It is lumpy and bumpy. It's supposed to be more even than this. But you basically pull loops through a piece of canvas and then lock them down with a piece of yarn. So the kit makes this, which is supposed to be like a trivet or a hot pad, which I feel a little bit weird about. Like, you put all that work into it and then you're gonna stick a pan on top of it and it's going to get all greasy and nasty, but we'll see what it becomes. But the kit came with this little book that kind of walks you through the basics, and there was somebody at the booth demonstrating it, so I was able to get kind of a good idea of how to do it before I bought the kit. And it also included all of the wool, and I had quite a bit left over. This is Navajo churro, and it also includes a locker hook, which is kind of like a crochet hook, but it's got a hole, like an eye on a needle. And it included some yarn to finish the edges, but I ended up spinning some of the leftovers and making that the edging so that it matched what the rest of the pad looked like. So that was fun. It's definitely takes some muscle, and as you can see from how uneven my work is, I think it's an interesting texture, but the goal is to have it be pretty even, and so it's definitely going to take some practice to make it more even. It is something that uses up a lot of yarn or fiber, so I've kind of got my eye on this for stash busting, and I did buy a larger piece of canvas to maybe work on something else later on. So that was from the folks at Dyers Wool. So then from Sundance, I bought a pair of slippers. These are sheepskin, and they're very soft and fluffy, and my slippers that I have at home are they're like 10 years old and they're getting really ratty, so it's time for something new. So I am looking forward to keep my toes warm in these. I bought some yarn from Yampa Valley Fiberworks. This is a blend of 20% alpaca, 20% long wool, and 60% CVM. So it's got some really nice softness, but it's also got just a little bit of sheen to it. And that's going to probably end up being a weaving project. And they are pretty local to me. They are in Craig, Colorado. So I got a boatload of spinning fiber from Hummingbird Moon. So these are all 4 different colorways, and it is a Polworth silk blend. And I took a class several years ago with Maggie Casey where she gave us some of this lady's fiber to spin, and it looks, in the braid, it looks very speckly, but when you spin it up, because the spots of dye on the fiber are so very short, it blends into something that's really subtle and really pretty. So I'm excited to play with these colors. And like I mentioned earlier, I was not sure that I had enough yarn to complete that sweater, so I got some more of this. It's 70% merino, 30% Teeswater from my friends at 2BU. So that's a really lovely gray color. And then from my friend Ruth at the Natural Twist, I got this, which is a really lovely, it's wool, alpaca, and a silk noil blend, and the color is Sailor's Delight. She had a sample there of how it spins up. So all those little spots, those are the silk noils, and they spin up to be just this really fine texture in the yarn, and I'm really excited to play with this. I might spin it as it is, or I might blend it a little bit more just to get a little bit more out of it, but that is that fiber. And last but not least, I did get this. This is a sheepskin that I got from my friend Elena at Cactus Hill Farm. And everything that she does is really beautiful. She grows some really beautiful fleeces, and I just couldn't justify buying one when I have so many that I need to process. But this winter I'm really going to work on processing and spinning lots of fleece, and so hopefully that picker will help me do it faster and better. And I've got a couple of colorways that are in the dye pot as we speak, and those will be listed in the shop here pretty soon. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!